Did you notice the scripture sentence this morning? I don't often draw attention to it, but the idea of it week by week, that little sentence from the Bible which begins the service just after the first hymn, is that in some way it indicates what the theme of the service will be. There are times, of course, when it works better and times when it works less well. But I think today is one of those better days. Today, the key phrase is this: let everything you do be done in love. Our first reading, which comes from the letter of James, and I see Jack is coming down prepared to read it for us. The letter of James is one which Reformed theologians have had a lot of trouble with. Martin Luther famously called it that epistle of straw, so worthless he thought it. And that's actually pretty mild for the famously foul-mouthed reformer. He said a lot more fruity things than that, apparently. I have a suspicion that many Reformed theologians don't actually find James complicated enough. As we'll hear, there's a fairly simple message in the passage that Jack will read for us. But Reformed theology, if I can make a sweeping generalization, delights in systems, and it tries to make every aspect of theology fit into these intellectual systems. Reformed theology states that it is through faith, not works, that we are saved. Setting aside whether or not that's right, the question is, how can what James says, that faith without works is dead, fit with the great Reformed theme of salvation through faith alone? Of course, that's a question which would never have occurred to the writer of this letter. He, assuming it was a he, the letters of the New Testament like this often being named after an honored person rather than their author, this person is concerned that people should live lovingly, that everything they do should be done in love. And he calls out an example of a particular congregation not doing this, not living lovingly. Doing everything in love is also a feature of our gospel lesson. But it begins with a story of Jesus initially failing to do so, failing to live lovingly. We'll look into that a bit more closely once we've heard the readings. What was he thinking of? Why should he say such a thing? There's a woman clearly desperate, pleading for the health, for the life of her daughter. And Jesus is frankly, insultingly insensitive. It's behavior we've been taught not to expect. Yet Mark, who could have written a different story, writes this one in which Jesus calls a foreign woman's deeply troubled daughter a dog. It's not a loving thing to say. It's not a good example of doing everything in love. What this story does, first of all, is force us to think about our understanding of Jesus. We're so used to thinking of Jesus as being the Son of God, as being sinless, according to the formulations agreed after much wrangling and politicking and power play in the 4th century, long after the New Testament texts had been written. The so-called orthodox theology of the church can all too easily lead us to forget that Jesus was actually a human being. And it is to his humanity that this story bears witness, uncomfortably so, along with all the other stories that we know of Jesus being tired, or wanting to get away, or being crabbit with the disciples when they really weren't getting what he was trying to say. As I just said, the idea that Jesus was divine emerges after the Gospels were written. It's read into them rather than being explicitly stated by them. So Mark tells us a story of the humanity of Jesus, seen in a moment of irritability. Yet Mark does so as a person in a community which believes passionately that Jesus, more than anyone else, has shown the character of God, even though he could be irritable, even though he could be insensitive, even though he could be insulting. Mark and his community do not at this stage have a concept of Jesus as perfect, as sinless. But even with his human lapses, things that are all too familiar to us from our own lives, Jesus does better than anyone else at showing us God. An argument takes place. The woman is not discouraged. She is equal to taking on Jesus and calling him out. You can surely spare a bit of compassion for my daughter, she tells Jesus. And he realizes that she is right. And Mark goes on to tell a story of a child made well, a child made whole again. All of the Gospels are witnesses to the benefits of faith in particular communities and individuals, namely the writers and the people that they lived among, the people who created and told and treasured the stories that we can read from the pages of the Bible. The Gospel of Mark is a witness to Mark's community's experience of the healing and life-giving effect of faith in Jesus in their lives. And this story is a testament to something that they had observed, something they maybe hadn't expected, perhaps something they hadn't particularly welcomed. But what they had seen was this: people from out with their community, out with their faith tradition, were also experiencing healing and wholeness and hope and new purpose in life through faith in Jesus. Perhaps there had been people angry that foreigners, that non-Jews, were getting in on Jesus. Maybe some, perhaps those who most strongly thought of him in terms of fulfillment of messianic promise, who thought he really had nothing to do with people who were not Jews, were feeling resentful, were feeling that the new hope that they had found was somehow being diluted by being shared by people from outside their own community and tradition. So I think that this story was told for these people. A story of Jesus abandoning an exclusivist attitude. And so the message within Mark's community from this story is this: we must do likewise. We must live lovingly towards people we never previously considered worthy. This is how our faith in Jesus compels us to act. How does your faith in Jesus compel you to act? The next story confirms faith's compulsion to live lovingly. On the surface, it's a story about a deaf person gaining or regaining his hearing. But underneath, it's a story about openness. Who is really deaf in this story? It is the people who do not hear cries for help because they're coming from people that they're not interested in. It's the people with closed minds and closed hearts, people who are not living lovingly, who are not open to the needs and concerns of others. Mark is saying, here is witness to the effect of faith. We can no longer close our ears or our hearts to anyone, not if we take seriously this radical love we see and experience in Jesus. To whom is your faith opening your ears and your heart? If we turn to the reading from the letter of James, it's all made rather more explicit. The passage we have read points out that it is easy to fawn over people whose favor may be advantageous because they have power or money. But we mustn't do that, he says. They are the ones that we should be treating with particular caution. Their record towards you is not good, because it is the wealthy who oppress and persecute, not the poor. The mark of true faith is living lovingly towards the people who have no power or influence, especially those who are desperate, those who are most in need. And living lovingly is not a matter simply of warm words. It's a matter of action, of giving food to a hungry person, of giving clothes to someone who is cold, of offering peace in the life of someone who is troubled. I'm not sure that the messages of these readings are any different for us from what they were for those who first told and heard these stories and read that letter. We too have an instinct for looking after ourselves and those like us. We too need to be reminded to be open to others. We too have a tendency to be taken in by things that might appear to be impressive. So we too need to be reminded of what really matters. We too can be shaped, even in ways we are unaware of, by past experience or by culture or by expectations, either our own or other people's. So we too always need that reminder that faith is best expressed in living lovingly. That true religion is doing everything in love. Amen.